Hi, I'm Shane O'Mara.
I'm Colin Tsunoda.
And we're going to be studying the function of the Flexor Hallucis Longus while walking.
Okay, so the first hypothesis we came up
with that the Flexor Hallucis Longus is going to help us control pronation. Because as we pronate, the Flexor Hallucis Longus is put on a stretch, which then leads us to our second hypothesis that it also is a very big assister, the transition point for supination, where it provides a rigid lever to provide force for us to move forward. And now we're going to show you why we came up with these through an experiment with Come and through an experiment with a model that we created. Alright, so as we said here, our first hypothesis is that the Flexor Hallucis Longus is going to assist us in pronation. So as Come here starts to pronate, he's going to see a dorsiflexion at the ankle. He's going to evert the foot, and he's going to forefoot abduct away from the midline. So as we see Come go down to pronation, and now as he's landing, the Flexor Hallucis Longus is now put on its greatest stretch. As you see, the dorsiflexion causes the tibia to come over the foot, which here puts the Flexor Hallucis Longus, which runs underneath the medial malleolus from its origination of the posterior surface of the tibia all the way underneath the medial malleolus to its insertion underneath the base of the phalanx. Hallux, actually. Base of the hallux. So now at this position here, the Flexor Hallucis Longus is put on its greatest stretch. So, as we said, the muscle spindles within the Flexor Hallucis Longus respond to this stretch and say, okay, Flexor Hallucis Longus, it's time to contract. So as we see here, it is the last stage of pronation, the very last stage of pronation, but it also marks the very beginning of supination. So now as Come starts to propel off of this foot, he's now plantar flexing into the ground. His forefoot is now adducting, coming towards the midline, and he is inverting the foot. And the main supplier of force for this movement right now is the Flexor Hallucis Longus, because, like we said, is in its response to the stretch from pronation. So now, as Come takes his step, that rigid lever and that force, and he is now able to propel off the surface beautifully. Totally. Now, if we just see this in motion, if Come starts back from here and he walks towards the camera, you can see that Flexor Hallucis Longus provide the force and absorb the force for each movement. Alright, so as we saw in Come's foot, we saw that this is acting as our Flexor Hallucis Longus. The muscle belly is close to its origin, which is the medial posterior aspect of the tibia, which runs down along medially underneath the medial malleolus to its insertion underneath the base of the hallux. So as we said, it assists with absorbing the force in pronation, and as it absorbs force, it is essentially put on a stretch. And as we said here, the muscle spindles within the Flexor Hallucis Longus respond to this stretch and thus cause contraction to occur, which in this contraction provides the force for supination. So the Flexor Hallucis Longus can also be termed as the turning point between pronation and supination in our gait. As we see, so as we pronate, put on its greatest stretch, and then in response to that, we get contraction and a providing of a rigid lever for supination.